Rated T for Teen.
The first thing that appealed to me as somebody who's worked with a number of similar RTS format and genres was the scope and the range of this particular project. We were going from medieval sword and sorcery type genre all the way up to the future science fiction. With the prior games in this franchise, there was, I believe, a lot more effort to follow historical accuracy with the characters, with the buildings, the environments throughout. We decided that we wanted to be able to push it a little further in terms of fantasy, fun, exaggeration, a little more over the top, and a little more stylization. It just so happened that I'm a history buff. I've already done a lot of research into military history, costumes, armor, warfare. When you start really delving into the history, you realize that all the cultures, all the societies, all the armies borrowed from each other. And there were elements of Western armor incorporated into the Mideast who were borrowing from the Mongols. We were able to borrow from all these separate cultures, architectural features from Thailand, from China, from Japanese, and kind of blend them together and come up with an overall look. I would look at a lot of Tibetan architecture, look at Tibetan armor, because it has such an exotic feel to it. And everybody by now is already familiar with the samurai warrior. You've already seen the ninja done 1,000 times. But there's so many other little cultures and interesting art styles and feelings and flavors from all these other unique Far Eastern cultures that it was really a lot of fun to research those, explore those, and then try to meld it all together into something that was a little more interesting. The sum was a lot more interesting than the parts. I always tried to make it historically accurate enough that somebody who's well versed in history could look at that and easily recognize what the unit was supposed to be, what period it represented, what region that it should be from. While you may not see any one particular unit depicted in the history books, I don't think any one of our characters would be out of place historically. I had a pretty strong background in working in science fiction and fantasy. The Western mechs, when I started out coming up with the ideas for them, I thought in terms of animal forms and functions, but I was trying to come up with locomotion and silhouettes that were a little more unusual on the Far Eastern units. That got even more creative in terms of how far we could push the fantasy element, and so I like the future units a lot for the Far East too. I tried to maintain some faithfulness in that whatever we created, as bizarre as it ended up looking, for the most part, it was rooted in reality, that it felt like it had form, function, and that it would really actually work in the sense that it was supposed to. We always had a conscious effort to try to maintain a completely separate look for each region, so that when you're looking at this from the RTS perspective from a distance and looking top down on some things, the player doesn't have to stop and study something to figure out what's going on. I knew that we were going to have to try to keep the textures and the geometry as individual as possible, using organic shapes for the Far East and more boxier geometric shapes for the Western units in order to fit the criteria that was being established for the Mideast. We started creating more of a post-apocalyptic feel to it. So there's always a temptation that while you're working on a Western unit, you'd like to use some post-apocalyptic elements, but you realize that you need to confine that to the other regions, so again, you have that separate identity for those regions. Those are the kind of details that we were really paying attention to that may be subtle and people may take for granted or might not even notice on a conscious level. where we really spent a lot of time thinking about these things and trying to solve these problems. I think we succeeded in that pretty well, and I'm pretty happy with that.
Empire Earth 3. Your quest for world domination begins November 2007. Visit EmpireEarth.com.